What to do, y'all? This is Chris Evans, and this is Talking Data and More. And today I have a very special guest that has enabled SMBs to enterprise customers and global customers. Not only has he made these customers data-driven, but he's also allowed the customers to be more predictable and analytical with their data. So I want you all to welcome my guest, CTO of Precision Analytics Group, Chris Williams. What to do, Chris?
Hey, Chris, it's wonderful to be back with you today. As you said, my name is Chris Williams. I am the Chief Technical Officer for Precision Analytics Group, a small business analytics consulting firm. We're based out of Portland, Oregon, and we are certified by the state of Oregon as an emerging small business, as well as a minority business entity. We've been in existence for 2 years, but I've been in the business analytics and predictive analytics field for about 25, from building analytic systems to modeling and developing reports on those analytic systems. And it's a real pleasure to be here today.
That's awesome, Chris. It's a pleasure to even have you on based on your knowledge and the value that you're providing your customers, right? And you know, I have to ask, before we get into it, as you can tell from the background, the love of comics. Yeah, so I got to ask you, who is your favorite comic book character, anime? I got to ask and why, right? Come on.
This is funny. This is an excellent question because I absolutely love anime and I love fictional characters. With being COVID and everything, we've been forced primarily to stay at home. So we've been getting reacquainted with some of the fictional characters that I've loved in the past, and also learning new ones thanks to, online videos and movies and such like that. So however, after careful thought, I'm going to keep this one pretty mainstream, and I'm going to go with Luke Cage. The dude has power and a no-nonsense attitude. And I feel this way for several reasons. First of all, his story is empowering. Cage, being an ex-conflict in prison for a crime he did not commit, who gained superhuman strength and unbreakable skin after being subjected voluntarily to an experimental procedure. Once freed, he became a hero for hire in one of the roughest, toughest cities, in one of the roughest boroughs in those cities, New York City and Harlem. So he's the ultimate lethal weapon for good. Second, he may have one of the best catchphrases I've ever heard. Sweet Christmas. I mean, really, who says that anyway? He can kick your face in and just say Sweet Christmas, and it all seems to be okay after that.
I love it, Chris. I love that.
and the last one is actually a little bit more serious than the Sweet Christmas, is the mantra that he lives by. Probably something that we all should really consider at some point in our lives is never backward, always forward. Progress is imperative, not just professionally, but also personally. We always should strive to get better in some capacity. And moving forward is one of the only ways you can do that.
I totally agree. And as you can see, like I said, Luke Cage right here. And I think that's a great superhero and what he embodies, right? So that's awesome, Chris. And I'm hoping, and Netflix, even though you cancel it, maybe Disney, bring it back. The Luke Cage, the Punisher, the Flash, come on, bring it back. Right?
I think
I really appreciate that.
Yeah, the interaction with Jessica Jones and Luke Cage, and if that can just maybe pull a little bit more out of each other, I think that you'll probably see that. I mean, Iron Fist is fine, but the dichotomy between those three, I have a feeling somewhere down the line you're going to see a little bit more of Luke Cage. It may take some other navigable things behind the scenes to make it happen, but they can't even argue about how wonderful the series has been. And it's not a matter of
totally agree. Yep. And there's some bubblings that one is coming back. So I totally agree with you that they're going to need to bring that one back.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And, Chris, as you talk about, Luke Cage and his superpowers, right? And also being in one of the toughest cities in Harlem, right? And saving, all the people that need to be saved. And just like what you're doing today as the CTO, you're saving your customers. You're helping them to be data-driven. You're working with the customers, your users, and you're helping them facilitate the data blending, right? You're empowering them with the data analytics, but the predictive analytics. Can you talk about how are you doing this today with those customers and with those business users?
Absolutely. When analyzing what an organization needs, you first need to identify the problems and initiatives. This sounds simple, but it's so important. Once you agree on those, you need to be certain that you have the data available to answer those. So I liken this process to preparing a nice dinner. To make the meal, you need to determine what you need to do so. In some cases, you may already have all the ingredients to prepare the meal. In other cases, you may need to go to the grocery store to get more ingredients. You know, this is interesting because when performing analytics, you follow the same process. First, the client might check in-house to see if they have all the data necessary to answer a use case or two. If they don't, then we brainstorm on how to get that data. Sometimes it involves actually going outside externally to try to retrieve that data and try to figure out how long it takes to get those accounts, converting the data to something that they can use, and what kind of security needs to be implemented from that data. Or it may be as simple as adding to a process in which that already exists to actually pull more data from that particular data source. So you have a couple pronged, attack, or it could be a combination of both. So it's really important to understand truly what you have. Have you gotten everything out of what you're expecting from that data source? If you have, and you still don't have that data needed to answer that use case, then you want to look outside and say, okay, I know that this entity has this data. I need to figure out what I can do to get that. Compile the two, and you should have your answers for that particular use case, and you're off and running.
I love that too. And Chris, I love the analogy where he uses about preparing the dinner. Even a chef has his sous chefs. He has people helping them understand where, hey, these are the ingredients we need. What do we need to get? What is the data we need? I love the way you describe that and put that together. It's very, very, very true. And I love how you talk about how do you look outside the box, because you may not have everything there. Now, your point, you may have to look outside to provide them and your customers the value. Awesome.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I was cooking yesterday, and so what happens when you go to a store without a list? You keep forgetting stuff. So you have to make sure that you document everything that you really need. So that trip is only one, so that you know exactly what you're looking for. Because if you keep running around in circles trying to figure out what it is that you need because you haven't really documented properly, you're going to be wasting time, but money, person hours and time, which means money. So that turns into a risk, which is unnecessary. That can be avoided. So.
Correct. Yeah. And we want to, and I'm sure you're helping your customers avoid that risk, right? And customers such as the ones you're working with today and organizations, they're hearing the buzzwords, the predictive analytics. It's important. And it's important to my organization to be data-driven, right? Can you talk about the what and why predictive analytics is important for your customers' organization and the value it brings?
Sure. Any analytics decision should be data-driven because data is objective. Data doesn't have an opinion. It's just there in the form of numbers and sometimes text. Those texts support those numbers. However, there is truth to the statement that numbers don't lie. But in all seriousness, predictive analytics allows an organization to be more proactive in anticipating outcomes based off of data from previous events and current events, not just from hunches and assumptions, which would be subjective. You want to gather your data by data mining and data blending. And that could be a multitude of different data sources, which we touched on the last question. You may have customers that have data you get depending on your vertical. You may have data that comes in from sensors, like what we did at Whataburger. You may have appliances from like stoves or refrigerators that give you data. You may have other data. You may have external data, a plethora of different data sets. You want to gather all that of what's happened in the past. You also want to monitor what's happening now. At that point, you want to compile those two data sets of what happened and what is happening to set the table so you can build a predictive model that could possibly tell you what happens next. So in order really to start that predictive modeling process, you need to understand what you had and what you have, pull that together, figure out what factors really stand out and build your model off of those factors. Predictive models can help you prevent revisiting poor strategies that may have contributed to unfavorable results and shed light potentially on new strategies that could lead to better results. That's what it's all about, isn't it? You want to take whatever use case or whatever initiative that you have and improve it as an organization, improve it as a government, improve it as a school, or whatever it may be for your particular environment. You want to get better, but not just get better because assuming everything's wrong. You want to get better in saying what's working, keep that going, and add to it. You know, that's you use data to do that. Let your numbers help you make the decision. It should force you to look at those numbers and what they're saying, not ask a whole bunch of subjective questions to disprove your data that's already there in front of you.
Yeah, and Chris, you said it best, like the quote from Jay-Z, numbers don't lie, right? So that is true. But how are you looking at that? How are you analyzing it? And, you know, just to dig more into that, you know, as you talk about the predictive modeling, as you talk about digging more into the data, what do you see is one of the biggest challenges for these organizations, right, to incorporate, let's say, predictive analytics, right?
So two of the biggest challenges I see constantly when it comes to discussing predictive analytic is lack of data and focus. So let's discuss the focus portion first, because the lack of data doesn't matter if there's no focus on the initiative. The rest of the effort is really futile at best. So it's almost like herding cats to try to simplify this effort. I always try to start off with one or two items that they would like to predict. For example, let's take future sales for a particular manufacturer in a certain region. Once you focus on a certain question or a use case, we need to take inventory on what data sources you have available to answer that question or those use cases. Gather that data and see what you have. So let me stop there, because once you have your question established and once you have your use case established, there's your focus. That's your only focus. All this other stuff is peripheral noise, and it will cloud you from trying to actually figure out what you're trying to do. So I always start one or two. Just really get 2 points down and figure out what those are. Agree to that, then move on. Now you gather the data and see what you have. With the data that you gather, you may be able to identify holes in your data. And that time you may need to implement a process to fill those holes, whether it be acquiring access to new data sources or new data, or revamping a process to get more data from existing data source that you already have. From there, create, test, and deploy your predictive model, analyze your results, and implement a set of objective strategies. Keep in mind that this whole process is completely cyclical until you figure out exactly what your model is perfected to be. So you're going to you're never going to be perfect the first time around. You may have a great start, but the fact that it's cyclical means that you're going to look at it and say, okay, maybe we should put more emphasis on this type of thing. Maybe the data is telling me that I should focus on this factor. And do I have all the data necessary to really emphasize what that factor is? And if it's yes, then great. Then now you have a model that you have 100%, or at least pretty close to 100% confidence in. If it's not, then you need to figure out what data will make your confidence a little bit better. Remember, all of these predictive models, what they're going to yield are numbers and probability. And everything that those numbers are going to tell you is what your next move will be. So you really want to put everything you have into that predictive model. And the methodology to get that model correct is also important, because this is something that you're going to reuse to create all of your models with anything that you want to predict the future of.
And Chris, I totally agree. And you bring up a couple great points, I would say. So as you discussed earlier, you talked about the documentation, defining the use case, getting the data, and you just hit on the next question that I want to ask you, methodology, right? Methodology, it's very important. You know, and this is key for many customers, many organizations. What is the key to drive that project success, right?
Yeah, and this is, and it's I'm not going to give an overly technical data answer, because This can be applied to, what I'm going to tell you can be applied to any project in any type of situation. The real key to
Right.
driving project success is to set a definitive set of goals and a methodology to validate that progress as the project goes on. At the very beginning, you create a requirements document on that both parties can agree to. Now, you can get into real trouble here with having it too detailed, so much so that no one wants to ever pick it up again. Or it could be too bland and too short, where it leaves a lot of room for negotiation. Oh, I might have done this or I might have not have done this. You kind of have to have detail and conciseness. So it's going to act as your roadmap. So your requirements document is going to be your roadmap to success. If the client and the consulting company both agree on the requirements document and the detail and everything that's in it, that's going to be a huge step in ensuring success for the project. That's only part of the equation, though. One can accomplish the goals, but if the journey to get there, to accomplish those goals is horrific, that will definitely overshadow the result. So this means that you want to implement a regular process to review this progress, whether that means scheduled benchmarks, code reviews, and or touch points. All of those are key to ensure what's being produced by the consulting firm is actually what the customer wants. So this approach can save money with person hours and build professional trust between the two parties. Ultimately, this could lead to more work between the two parties for the future, because not only will you be accomplishing what you want, but you'll be establishing that professional trust between the two parties. And more often than not, when you create a relationship, it's hard to get in, but once you're in, if you create that trust and actually are effective in what you're doing, then the relationship is going to be more apt to be renewed, because you know what this company can do. They know what the quality that you're producing. And then you have that handshake. That's something that's really hard to get when you're dealing with consulting. It's just hard. And so, but at the end of the day, this whole process that I've talked about, as far as trying to figure out not just the requirements, but what will work, that's a predictive model in itself. And this predictive model I just described, as far as the factors involved in trying to figure out where you're going to go next with the consulting firm, that's something that's been used for many a year.
Yeah. And Chris, basically everything you just said right there, prior guests have hit and touched upon that process, the methodology. So important to bring that key synergy to allow, customers to work together with their consulting, their advisors, their partners, or even internal. So everything you said there is so true. That was what's going to allow that successful engagement, that successful deliverable. I couldn't say it better as what you just did right now. We appreciate those insights.
Sure, no problem. And just add on to that, whether you have an external project or an internal project, the methodology should be similar, because your requirements document acts as your testing document for whether or not you've actually accomplished what you need. And so the synergy between all of those factors is critical to ensuring the success from start to finish. You don't want to have a tumultuous time in the middle, because then you're going to have a sour taste in your mouth about the process, and you have to go back and review the process. So obviously nothing's perfect and everything gets tweaked when you have the new project come along. You figure out what works and what doesn't work. But this this is cyclical too. So you just want to make sure that you listen and understand everything that's gone around you with your client, and also the people on your team who are executing the work. So it goes a lot of different directions.
Totally agree. And Chris, I have to ask before we wrap up, as you talked about, the technology, you talked about the processes, the methodology, what are some of the trends you see, because you've had the experience to work with the SMBs, the enterprise and global customers of the world today. What are some of the trends you see in, the whole predictive analytics space, the BI space, as well as just not only about the technology, but also, to your point, the methodology and process? How are those evolving and changing so that, customers can execute on these new data-driven visions, I would like to call it?
Yeah, and this is hard because data intimidates a lot of organizations. Um, you have stacks and stacks of data, and you have numbers, and you have Excel files, and you have flat files, and it's like someone sticks them in a closet, and no one wants to open the closet door. So I believe that organizations need to fully commit to the concept of the methodologies of predictive analytics, which means trusting the data that has been gathered internally and externally. They can't be afraid of the data itself. They can't be afraid of how much data is in there, what the data is saying, and how to proceed from there. There are a multitude of modeling strategies, algorithms, and testing to provide ample solutions to their problems. There needs to be 100% buy-in, or they'll be running in a quagmire of mediocrity. In most cases, the answers to their business needs are right under their nose, right in front of their eyes, buried in the data in front of them. They just have to trust the process and trust and commit to the process of being able to interpret what that is. So when you look at it, you look at all these stacks of data and you're all wide-eyed and you're trying to figure out, my goodness, what am I going to do with all this? Where do I start? Well, I mean, I told you where you start. You take a use case, you take a question, and you answer it. And then you basically climb that mountain incrementally. So as you get the confidence in answering some of these use cases and understanding the data that you have, trying to get more questions answered becomes easier because you've done it. You now have a blueprint on trying to figure out how to answer some of these urgent questions. Yeah, we want to get better. Some are more, urgent problems that you have to get, maybe something on a weekly process that you need to fix. Some are more quarterly, some are more annually. The point is that the methodology to get that data and try to address how to analyze that data and figure out what you have, and then going from there to figure out where you want to go, that becomes easier the more you do it. But it doesn't get done if you're kind of half-hearted. If you're 50-50, then you're going to be pretty much running in place, and you're going to be wasting time and money on your team. You don't want to do that. So then you get another cost risk and you don't have much to show for it because you spent money. You're kind of sort of doing it, kind of sort of not. So you just need to really dedicate and immerse yourself into the process of analytics. Don't be afraid to find the answers. I mean, the whole point is identifying a problem. The first part of solving a problem is identifying it and being truthful about it. Nothing changes here. The data, you have to listen to what it's saying to you. And then once you know what you're dealing with, it's a hell of a lot easier trying to figure out what to do next because you know what you're dealing with. You're not dealing with any surprises. So now you just have to figure out, okay, what's the process in which I can fix this? What has worked in the past? What might be working now? What hasn't worked? Throw that all together, you got yourself a predictive model that should help you.
Yeah. And Chris, yeah, totally agree. And like you said, regardless of the changes, now the more data customers are getting, you have to identify, as you mentioned, right? You have to understand the process, putting together the methodology. And to your point, the key one, trust, right? Trust, very, very key,
Yeah, trusting your data is important because the data doesn't care. Data doesn't have a mind of its own. Data is not subjective. The data is a result of something that's already happened. So you can't change that, but you can acknowledge it and listen to it for what it is.
Couldn't say it any better than that. Well, Chris, I want to thank you so much for taking the time and joining me on Talking Data and More, providing those valuable insights. Really appreciate it.
Oh, Chris, it's an honor to be on this show with you. It's been too long. We'll fix that. I enjoy everything about this. Always love talking data. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you. And hopefully we'll talk to you soon. Take care, Chris. Bye-bye.
Sure. Take care.